as the West slides into harder times, our loyalties will be questioned. I know that mine have been questioned even before all this stuff about Ukraine and the Donbass region and Putin, and whether Putin invaded or was invited to sort things out. And this raises the question, to what should we be loyal? I know that in times of war we are expected to back the government, however foolish the reasons the war that they got the country involved in is. When passions are at their height, it is easy to cast aspersions. But I think when we have the opportunity to calmly reflect on these hypothetical situations, we should ask ourselves, to what should we be loyal? There are, after all, many conflicting demands on our loyalty and priorities. Perhaps your children expect you to minister to them first, or you have two parents, they might want your attention both at the same time. So our loyalties are often divided, and we may not know what to do for the best when two people are asking for our attention at the same time. You can imagine a kind of dilemma you might face if you had, well, two parents and they were both drowning. Which one would you save first? I suppose I would be practical and say, well, I'll just have to go for the nearest one, because it would be terrible to, for that parent to see you swim past them to get to the other. So, for all, practical reasons, you would have to save the one nearest to you. But what if they were equidistant? Well, then that would be awkward. And I don't quite know how to resolve that. But in terms of being called unpatriotic or disloyal, I really think that the only way to resolve the situation is to already have had a religion that allows you to rise above it all. So these questions could easily be asked of, well, Germans under the Nazi regime. We, I mean, naive people would say, oh, these Germans, they should have known how evil Hitler was. How could they fight for him? But obviously at the time they didn't know how evil he was, or maybe they didn't think it was a problem for there to be internment camps for Jews before they were sent out of the country. It depends on the state of knowledge of the people at the time, and most people don't really want to fret about the details. I mean, how many people will ever bother to get to the nitty-gritty of what actually happened in the Ukraine? Most people will be happy to accept the official version that, Russia started it, and of course, they're the bad guys and we're the good guys, and that will be convenient to the government. So we don't ask any awkward questions because we don't know too much and don't want to. And there will be people who will deliberately not want to ask too many questions so that they can be in a position of plausible deniability. Now, I think we can only be loyal to truth, logic and morality. So truth is easy, and in the sense that if you believe something to be true, then you have to base your logical conclusions on it. And so as long as it's recognizably true and recognizably logical, then you're all right. But the problem is that of morality. Morality tells us, well, most people aren't even sure what morality is, and I'm saying it's always a system of rules, of do's and don'ts designed to keep the group in existence and apart from others. And that is why it is necessary that every nation have a functioning moral system, at least effective at maintaining minimum standards of sexual morality, ensuring that most parents in your society are married parents. But if you don't even have that minimum condition of sexual morality, then you are in trouble, and the West is in trouble because its leaders can't think straight and it has no moral system that its politicians are even seen to be following. So there is a certain difference in the way some Chinese politicians talk, because when they talk about some foreign policy matter, they will say something about what the constitution of the Chinese Communist Party says as regards oh, foreign policy or whatever. But for the Western politician, there is nothing. He has nothing at all to hold on to and say, because I followed this rule, I'm all right. Because the whole basis of his country, if it is based on the doctrine of parliamentary supremacy, is that he reserves the right to change his mind. So really, the Western politician has the female prerogative. It is a woman's prerogative to change her mind. And obviously, you can't be dealing with people like that to change their minds all the time, and you never know what they will say about a certain subject the next time you see them, because maybe this time you're lucky and they completely agree with you and applaud you for your stance on whatever, and the next time it will be as if you've never discussed the subject, and his position on the same matter will be quite different. And these people are impossible to deal with, but these people, unfortunately, are in charge of the ship of state. So what should we do as individuals if we aspire to a moral system? And it's obvious, isn't it? We have to first choose a moral system. There's no escaping it, I'm afraid. Because it's only when it's like a game, isn't it? If you want to play the game, you have to agree on what game. You have to choose a game, right? You have to choose. Is it drafts? Is it chess? Is it Risk? Is it Monopoly? Whatever. You have to choose a game. And once you choose a game, you have to abide by its rules. And there are no rules that anyone will follow in the West. So the Americans are in a slightly better position because, even if their politicians don't follow their rules, at least at least they know what the rules are supposed to be, or you can find them. And I'm afraid not in this country, not in the UK. But even worse is that they don't even know that they are supposed to follow the rules. So our politicians think that as long as nobody catches them saying or doing anything wrong, they're all right. And that's why things go wrong, because basically they don't have a conscience that tells them that they're not supposed to do these things. And if they do the things they're forbidden from doing, they should feel bad, because they don't feel bad. They don't even know that they're supposed to have principles. And so, everything goes wrong because of this. they don't even, they're not even loyal to this country that they're supposed, because they're not even loyal to the country that they live in. And they don't know that they're supposed to be loyal to the country that they presume to govern. They actually don't know. And this is why nationalism is so important, or at least the correct definition of what is nationalism, which is government in the national interest. And I know, okay, I've spoken to a few people about it, and it's like they don't compute, and they say, oh, what's the point of saying that? Because it doesn't get us anywhere, and it's because of their own feeble flaccidity that it doesn't get anywhere, because they can't actually engage. They can't have a dialogue about what is the national interest and why it's important. So, it's like, okay, you try to play a game. You can play a game of squash, there's a wall, you can hit the ball and it comes back and you can hit it again, and that's all right. But if you need another player, and the other player never returns your shuttlecock or your ball or whatever when they're supposed to, then you can't play the game. And this is obviously what I face. I don't know if they do it on purpose, or they're just actually, they're not capable of it. They don't know that they're supposed to return the ball, or they can't. And I mean, I kind of understand about not being able to return the ball, because there was a time when some kind person played tennis with me, and I literally couldn't return the ball. I had a racket. I mean, I did, I could go after the ball, but I couldn't hit it in a way that would cross the net. So that was a rather humiliating experience of playing tennis. But obviously, I'm sure if I took a few lessons, I would eventually be all right. But I'd never taken any lessons, and I didn't really get it. So even in these discussions, there are people who don't know that they're supposed to respond. So they think by not responding, by not arguing, the problem will go away, or the problem of having an exchange with me will go away. And yes, they get away with it for a bit, but the question remains about the national interest. And the least you can say about the national interest is that you should choose a religion that will keep your group in existence and apart from others, and so that you would have a nation in the first place to talk about governing in the national interest. That you actually have a nation to talk about. So I mean, there's no point talking about driving a car if you haven't got a car, right? So the sort of orders of things that you have to understand in order to get to the next stage. So there's no point talking about the national interest to, say, a child who would have no idea about what the national interest is. Maybe if it gets a bit older, it might understand that there are such things as countries, which might be called nations, which might have interests. But if you talk about the national interest to a toddler, it really wouldn't be able to grasp your meaning. And a lot of people, even educated people, have a problem with abstract ideas. They can only think in terms of the material. And that's why you get this problem with all these nationalists who are obviously not intellectuals, and they look around and they just see things that they don't like, and obviously they think in terms of people, and obviously they don't like lots of foreigners in their country, and that's how they react to things. It's like you know they're like maybe cats. you know I mean, think of non-human animals. They're very material because, well, they have appetites. They need to. Well, they know they need to go and get food. They need to get shelter. They need to avoid being eaten. And that's all they know. I mean, they won't be thinking about things like the national interest because it's just beyond their scope. But for us, well, there's a lot of people like peasants and uneducated people, and you know people with learning disabilities. And they won't be able to think about the national interest. Their minds aren't made that way. It was not part of their education. But the disturbing thing is that for those who ought to know about these things, who've been to a good university, they can't do that either. They can't actually talk about ideas. And so they are unable to solve their problems. And that's why, I talk to them. I try to talk to them, but they're just not interested. I mean, they're only interested in the ideas that they're interested in. They can't have a discussion. They clam up. They can't argue, and they don't want to. So if they think they've lost the argument, they'll just go quiet. So so nothing happens, or they refuse to take your point. But what I'm trying to say is, I'll have to look at the title again. To what should we be loyal? There we go. Ultimately, it has to be our principles, isn't it, that we have to be loyal to? Because, obviously you can say, well, I want to be a patriot, I want to be a nationalist, I want to, the best for my country and all that. And you think, yes, that's all well and good in theory, but what if your leader is Hitler? You'd have to, well, in some way protest, right? You'd have to, get yourself out of the problem. It's like if there's a war that you're going to be conscripted into and you don't want to fight it and you think it's wrong anyway, then you kind of owe it to yourself to dodge the draft. You just don't want to be put in the terrible position of having to do something and not wanting to do it, such as, killing people that, you don't want to kill. So, the best thing is to not join the army, So, in terms of loyalties, you can only talk in abstractions, and obviously we would have to subscribe to a moral system in order to have any more morality at all, to have some idea of what we must always do or must never do. And so we really need to choose a religion, and we don't have to like it completely. We just need to be able to, okay, we need to be able to hang our hat on some moral system, because the reason why these systems were created, I'm sure, was because people wanted to know. It's like, well, what sort of person are you? And there was a time when it wasn't acceptable to say that you're an atheist, nihilist, free thinker person, because then people wouldn't do business with you. You wouldn't get, well, you wouldn't get married because people would think you are, well, sad and bad and mad, not to have principles. So you'd have to pretend to have principles, and it's usually the religion of your parents that you would pretend to have. Unfortunately, these days, most people reject the idea of having a religion, and this means everybody's principles have to be, established from scratch. And what I think is a difficulty now is that people they don't even think they're not supposed, they don't even know they're not supposed to lie. They don't even know they're not supposed to be unreasonable. I mean, they say things like, "Well, it's just the way I feel." So it doesn't have to be logical, it just has to be what they want. Or the other thing they say is that, well, it might be your truth, but it's not my truth. And this means that they've totally distorted the meaning of words and language by saying that there can be more than one truth. There can be there can certainly be more than one opinion, but they've confused fact and opinion. And when people do that, they will be making all kinds of category errors and not be able to extricate themselves from their error and confusion. Now, I try to help people because I'm a kind sort of person, but sometimes people are in too deep and maybe you can't really help them, particularly if they don't want to be helped and they just want to carry on doing the wrong thing they're doing, and they don't want to admit that they were ever wrong, and they kind of stonewall you, and you can't really get anywhere with them. But the thing is that they still try to pretend that they are that they have political views that are worth listening to, even as they adopt hit and run at guerrilla tactics on you. So they'll say, "Well, I think this and this and that and that," and then you know when you respond, they they're not listening, or they just won't respond to your response. So that that isn't the way to conduct your discussions on politics. But I'm afraid a lot of people that I know do it like that, and they can't be reasoned with. And I know sometimes we get into a terrible loop of, you know, with particular people, especially, you know that you're going to get to a certain topic. No, okay, there is a topic, and then there'll be subtopics. One topic will contain certain words that you will be using, subjects you will be discussing in order to make the point. And often you get into a kind of loop where if you say this thing, that other person will say the other thing, and that's when you can never agree. So unfortunately, a lot of people are like that, and it's very disappointing. It's very frustrating. You know who you are, and that's why you have these incoherent positions that you can't even explain to yourself, and it makes no sense in the absolute context of your life, particularly with explaining what you have been doing all your life. And I suppose it's some sort of deep-seated neurosis which you can't explain even to yourself, because a neurosis is built on fear of something that you can't face. Maybe I have one or two of these dark corners myself. I mean, I don't really know, but it's possible. I should admit it. And things do get difficult if most of you are like this. Like that, you are like this, all of you, and there's absolutely no hope, because you just won't be able to get to the solution. You just wouldn't, and it's very sad. So I still haven't found anybody, honest enough to to, you just concede a point. I mean, people never concede a point because they think by remaining silent they can well, not take your point. So I must be thinking of ways of getting people to move, particularly the silent ones, the avoidant ones, uh, I mean, ultimately they can just say, "Well, I'll never speak to you again if you bother with me again with this subject. It's very painful for me, and I can never discuss it, and I will never do what it is you ask of me." And you know, there will be situations like that, and yeah. So these people never really find out what their principles are. I suppose they go around thinking, "Well, I've done, I've done my bit," and I think, what bit? What has that achieved? It hasn't achieved. It hasn't achieved anything. And so you must at least reason through the process of how you came to be here. I mean, at least explain yourself to yourself about how you came to be where you are, whether you think it's a good place or not, and where you hope to be going, and whether you have a realistic prospect of going anywhere with things the way they are, and if not, what you ought to do. And I think really that you must just do, you must just go where truth takes you, and you have to use reason to solve and avoid problems within the constraints of what you know you must or mustn't do. And there's will be things like, well, not kill people, not steal from them, and not commit sexual offences. We're already in difficult territory about sexual morality because we can't agree, can we? Some people think gay marriage is okay. Some people think it's very good, and some people think it's terrible and has to be abolished. And ultimately, this is where we get stuck on sexual morality. And there's a lot of neurosis because well, people's views on these matters vary so much. And I'm saying this is exactly the problem. We have to discuss it, and people won't because they know they've been morally compromised. And this is the source of the neurosis and the obstruction. And this probably explains the fear of so many people in having to go there, because once they talk about sexual morality, eventually the ugly head of Sharia will rear its head, the ugly subject of Sharia, and they don't want to go there, and they think they can avoid it, and obviously I have to push for it. Come on, I have to. And I know this upsets people, and they say things like, "Oh, we're not ready for this yet." And, it's so obvious. Well, then you'll have to get yourself ready for it. Or I'll have to get you ready for it. Because what else? What else are you going to do? You're just going to say, oh, I won't do it in my lifetime. But then why did you get involved in politics if you can't even discuss the logical next step? So there's no joint up thinking. And basically my principle is yeah, I mean, I have to choose a moral system. I have chosen a moral system. Everybody else seems to think they can do without it, do without one, that their country can do without one. And, even as they complain about the egregious corruption and incompetence of their politicians starting wars, just doing crazy, stupid things, and then they still won't talk about it. They won't take the next step. And I'm saying, I have the system. It's it's the only way. It's the only way to solve your problems. It's this system that I'm talking about that gives your um, it's like a flow chart basically, and and this allows you to you know how to deal with your problems. If you put them through the right channel, and eventually you will come up with the correct solution, not just one based on your whims and your fancies and your mood that particular day. So I really do appeal to people with whom I have disagreed in the past. I mean, maybe they don't listen to me anymore because they think they know what I'm going to say. But I think even those who are bored with me, I don't think they completely understand me. And possibly they don't want to. Now I'll read the chat. Hello, Half Galician. How nice to see you again. What do you want me to repent of, Half Galician? There's no bargaining. Well, I'm not bargaining at all. Well, I'm saying we have to be loyal to our principles, and if that's what we are, then we have to declare our principles. All right, we have to declare our principles. So, obviously, we should. If we get caught lying, then we'll be in trouble. If we are not capable of logical thought, then we're also in trouble. But if we're capable of being truthful and logical, then the next step would be, well, whether we are principled. And if we never declare our principles, then nobody will know what our principles are. So let me suggest that we, have a principle of obeying the no hide laws. And then I'm going to get a lot of, people who want to be idolaters and blasphemers, and and that is really the problem. That some people will think idolatry is fine. And that's a fault of the Jews, because they haven't done their job at all, because they haven't taught the no-hide laws. They haven't explained the problem of idolatry and blasphemy, because they're afraid of being pogromed or something. So basically, the problem of idolatry is that you don't have any principles. You only have the principle of worshipping this idol or that idol, and all your rules are impossibly vague, which means you can't behave properly towards each other, and then your society gets infiltrated and taken over. So it's important to understand the oneness of God, because basically the no-hide laws. The seven no-hide laws are the absolute minimum of what you need to have an advanced civilization. And I know people will just not be able to accept that idolatry and blasphemy is a problem, particularly the atheists and the post-Christians, because they just don't see it as a problem. And I'm saying it obviously is a problem because there's a lot of problem thinking in these circles. You're blaming the elite again. What real things do you want me to talk about? I am coherent. I was talking about principles. I'm still talking about principles. Well, my voice has been like that all day. Good question from Jay. Where do we get our principles from? We get it from our moral system, aka religion. Why are you pissed off, Rune Skitzing? What did you think of Rob Dufour? I found it rather dull. What don't you think I lived up to, half Galician? What moral pronouncements have I made? I don't think I've made any. I was just talking generally about the subject. He won't invite me. Dutton won't invite me because I don't know. I mean, what he said to this person who has written to him is that I was a bit rude to him, and it was just some sort of petty, rude, bitchy thing. So, I said a few things about him on my blog, and he's just getting on his high horse and said, "Oh, she offended me, and I'm not going to talk to her, and she's got a smaller channel, and I don't want to promote her." But I think it might be just sort of cowardice, because I noticed in the chat in that stream, it's just exploding with Islamophobia, and he probably didn't want. Okay, here's my theory. My theory is that secular Quranism is so glorious and powerful and wonderful that it would just be launched the moment I am given a platform such as Ed Dutton's or any of the others that I've mentioned, and he doesn't want to be the one because he doesn't want to get into trouble with being the one to platform me and making and allowing secular Quranism to become what's the word? To metamorphosize into the butterfly that it was intended to be. So how have I been ridiculous? Have I said anything ridiculous? I think I've been quite coherent about what I said we should be doing about having principles. What's this about the can and the string? I don't want to go. I don't want to do any gardening. Really? We can all change? Let us improve together? What are you suggesting? Well, I thought I was making an important point about what we should be loyal to, particularly when there are people who feel they should be loyal to their country. And I thought, well, that's all very well and good, but what if your country is being led by Hitler? Then what then? I am reading a book. I have been reading a book. What's your problem? I have actually been reading a book recently, so I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, this is, I don't know, but it might be the sixth or seventh stream, I don't know. But I wanted to make the point that in a war situation, we should ask ourselves to what we should be loyal. Well, what's wrong with that? It's a philosophical question that I've never considered. And I'm saying it's just stupid to be loyal to your country when it might, when your corrupt leaders might be sending you to die in a pointless imperial war that might, that was, well, it has happened. And therefore, we should ask ourselves, to what should we be loyal? And so it seems that our morality should take precedence over considerations of, what war your country is currently waging. So if you can avoid, being conscripted into a war that you would be expected to kill for, then obviously you should do that. And I suppose if you're an empire, you're more likely to have that happen to you than if you were a sensibly run republic. Though, well, China's an empire and also a republic, and therefore maybe it doesn't really matter about whether you can be an empire and a republic. I was thinking of Rome when it was a republic, and then it became, and then it had its first emperor, Augustus. So I'm not quite sure whether you're an empire means you have to be a republic. Well, America is a republic and it has an empire, it has a global empire. So, yeah, you can be both. I see Joe is back again. So, to conclude, we should be loyal to our principles, and we can only have principles if we subscribe to a moral system. And I wonder if the people in the chat have a moral system. Why don't you tell me what they are? So, Joe, are you for war with Russia and China or anyone else? You're saying it as if it were a bad thing that I would be against war with Russia and China. I'm just assuming that most people in this chat would be against Russia and China, against war with Russia and China. Slavery is an institution, and institutions should be regulated and not criminalized. As for that wife beating verse in the Quran, it is fair enough. If no violence actually occurs, it's just, an extra step that you have to take before you can divorce her. So what's the problem? So Joe, did you want a war with Russia and China? You seem to be using that as clear blue water between us. Who is we? Why would I be considered an enemy when I'm always considering the national interest? See, Joe can't answer. Just because he doesn't like me, he's going to call me the enemy. But he has no principles, you see. I'm so glad he turned up because we know he's an atheist. He has no solutions. But he thinks he's better than me because he's white and male and was born in the UK. And that's it. That's his reasoning process. Oh, hysterically, he says Russia will invade the West. Is that what you really think? Well, Russia is more rationally governed than the West. And I'm afraid today will mean bad things for the West because, it will have suffered a humiliation. Incompetent and corrupt leaders will be even more neurotic. Joe has made no sense at all. So he says, I want war with Russia. No, he wants war with Russia and China. And he's saying, it's bad of me not to want war with Russia and China. And he thinks Russia wants to invade the West, which is hysterical nonsense, isn't it? And Joe, as we know, has no principles at all because he's an atheist. So he's a very confused person, and if he became your leader, he will just lead you into defeat and disaster. Yes, it's just insults. He has no solutions, but he's another Christine Ramsey, really. She has no solutions, but he obviously hates me, but too many people like that, and that is the problem. People with no principles, with no solutions, but they still want to win the argument when they can't even formulate any coherent argument. Why don't you state a principle of two, Joe? What's your principle? Have you got any? I'm agnostic. So he thinks his atheism is superior to all the ancient religions of the world, and well, he's very, very typically nationalist, I suppose. Well, tell us your principles then. What principle do you have? You won't be able to tell us. He can't even tell the truth or exercise logic. And he will say anything, or even though he knows it to be a lie, and exercise faulty logic to do down his enemies. And I'm afraid this is this policy of the West in telling lies and being and relying on very unsound arguments has brought the West to this pretty pass. So it looks like Russia will utterly humiliate the West, and the West will, well, these countries will just look very foolish in the eyes of the rest of the world. You see, Joe has no arguments at all. All right. We should be loyal to our principles where it can be found. For some people like Joe, who has none, he will be very confused and very angry. But that's his problem.